There's no better way to start it off than with the guy who has been discussed as the de facto number one player in the class. I, of course, am talking about Dylan Raiola, who is currently in speculation to possibly end up at Nebraska. There's possibility of him end up going up to Georgia. Was at one point committed to Ohio State, and that appears to no longer be on the table. So, Matt, I want to dive into first talking about this guy and just breaking him down as a player, looking at his highlights, what he brings to the table as a prospect. What caught your eye when you were watching him?
The first thing that pops out when you're watching his film is just that he's a grown man already on the high school field. I mean, he's a guy that is listed as 6'3", 220 pounds, and he looks every inch and every pound of it on the football field. I mean, he just looks like a pro football quarterback on a high school level field already, just with his physical presence standing back there in the pocket. The other thing that really jumps out when you're watching is just his ability to flick the football down the field with tremendous ease and power. I mean, there's a few clips where he throws the football, it seems like just about 60 yards, and it doesn't even look like he's putting his all into it. So there is obvious just arm talent and arm power that goes along with his presence and his athleticism. And he's just one of those dudes that's been put on earth to throw things, man. So whether he was being an Olympic javelin thrower, or the greatest rock skipper in the world across, some lake, man. I mean, this dude just knows how to sling the football. Still see a little rawness as far as his, ability to just drop back and dissect defenses, but that's just high school football. At high school football, they're making it easy on him. They're letting him just take advantage of his tremendous assets athletically. But as you continue to watch him and his growth, especially for this season, want to see a little bit more decision-making, going through reads, finding the number 2 or 3 read, more often, which in today's high school football isn't asking much. We start to see that a little bit more with certain high schools have that ability to do that. We know that he has just unbelievable talent, but that's something that going forward, want to see that progression and that next step for him as a football player.
Yeah, Raiola, you see the physical traits and a lot of the things that tend to put these guys in the top ranking. He kind of checks a lot of those boxes. The athleticism,
for sure.
The very, very easy arm talent. Of those things that you talked about there, for painting this picture of this guy, if we were to compare him maybe, and I know, we try to put this into really good perspective of like, how would he compare to an Arch Manning, who was the number one recruit in the previous class? And there was some speculation that some thought that Arch maybe shouldn't have been that number one guy, but maybe if we compared him to a Nico Iamaleava, how far along do you think a guy like Dylan Raiola is compared to those guys?
Yeah, well, that's a great example as far as the yin and yang of this discussion. With Arch, you did see them running an offense that was well thought and well designed, and him going through and making decisions like you would see a next level quarterback doing. Whereas with Dylan's case right now, I think you just see a little bit more of a simplified offense. And of course, I'm watching the highlights, so I'm seeing just highlight plays. But you're seeing more so of just great one-on-one throws down the field with just tremendous power and accuracy, which is a tremendous ability in itself. You're seeing throws that, movement in the pocket and stuff where plays are being broken down and he's escaping and making great throws on the run. The difference between him and Arch is just, you can see his natural athleticism pour out through the film much more easily. You could see that he just has a very dynamic, strong arm as compared to Arch. But in the other aspect of it, you saw Arch make good decisions. You saw him go through, the progression of his reads, seeing the defense and making footwork and the throw match each other, which of course, like all great evaluators, like our quarterback evaluators love to see, right? Is the footwork and the eyes match each other. And you see that a lot with Arch and what he's done at his school. So that's where for Dylan, I hope that there's more of that as I look deeper into his film, and hopefully see that more too going forward in the future for him as far as his development.
Yeah, and I know we have that extra season for Arch and Iamaleava and Malachi Nelson, but Again, you still see, I was frankly a little bit more impressed, if anything, with just the physical tools, not
For
maybe
sure.
the development, but the tools in general, all the things that you're talking about there, like the
Yeah.
deep ball accuracy was really fun in the highlights, which is always really fun to see. And
Hmm.
that's what attracts us to certain quarterback prospects. But like, if
And
we're,
that's what's most important for the high school level too, which a lot of
yeah,
people have to understand. I mean, there's guys out there that are great decision makers in high school. I mean, you can even look back at Sean McVay when he was coming out of high school in Georgia. He was a great quarterback that played really well at the position.
yeah.
But there's the physical traits of other players that are in the same class as him that you just can't deny those things. And you have to take a chance on them and developing that. And then when you get to college, going into the pros, that's where you want to see the mental and the physical match each other going forward. So in high school, it's all about raw talent. And this guy, Dylan, has unbelievable raw talent as a thrower.
So that's like a really good setup here to talk about the raw talent that he brings to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good juxtaposition for talking about Arch, because some argue that Arch is more now ready to play than most other recruits, but maybe doesn't have the raw, tangible skills compared to other guys in his previous class, and then also
Right.
compared to Raiola. So, like, if we were looking at a guy like Raiola, and I know, again, we still have one more year left of him to play, but is there, if he takes that step that we're hoping for and that improvement that you just talked about that you need to see from him? I know it kind of depends on where he goes. If he goes to Georgia, there's going to be a little bit more of a fight. If he goes to Nebraska, it might be a little bit more of an open door for him to step onto the field sooner. But just from what you've seen so far, and if he takes that step forward, is this a guy that you'd be willing to start as a true freshman, or do you think it's a little too soon for that?
I would say that at Georgia, he would have to be someone that would be groomed to the position maybe a little bit more just because of the demands of a week to week basis as far as Georgia's expectations and Georgia's competition level. Whereas I think at Nebraska, I think he can go in and play right away. And there really is no expectation level for them right now. The expectation is just overall improvement of the organization and just progress. Where stepping into the shoes of a Stetson Bennett and all that stuff and going in there and playing right away as far as the success that they've had at Georgia recently, I think would be a lot for a young man to walk into and take advantage of. At the same time, though, I think about like our discussions with Brock Purdy this past year. I mean, that's a guy that played a ton of football at Iowa State, and they were a bowl eligible team just about every year. And he got a ton of experience. And every week he was getting a lot of throws. He was learning how to make great football plays. He was learning from his mistakes and developing as a quarterback each and every week. And I think for Dylan at Nebraska, it will be very similar. A guy that's going to get a ton of experience. He's not going to have anyone chomping at his heels to take his spot. He's going to be able to learn from those mistakes, improve, and also help the program grow as he grows with it.
So to then transition here to talking about his potential of where he could end up.
Right.
At one point, he was committed to Ohio State, as I said earlier. He decommits, and now there seems to be a bit of a tight race between Nebraska and Georgia, as Nebraska has had this late surge onto the scene for his recruitment. And it sounds like if you read a lot of different websites, I know that this early on in the process, it's so inconsistent what each site is saying. But it sounds like
Right.
Nebraska has a legitimate shot of maybe pulling Dylan Raiola here with the other schools that are on the table. Oregon and USC are some of the warmer schools if you look at some of his projection lists.
Mm-hmm.
But for Raiola, this Nebraska option seems really interesting to pay attention to because his dad was an All-American center, Dominic Raiola. His uncle, Donovan Raiola, is the offensive line coach. It's actually funny if you look on 24/7 Sports, it says who recruits each guy, and it says it's his uncle who's the one tasked with recruiting him. So
it better be. Yeah.
right, that might be a little awkward if you just kind of happen to see your uncle and your uncle's not the one who's picking up the phone every other
Right.
day. And I'm
Right.
sure he's calling him frequently to try and
Yeah.
sway him. But he was at a basketball game this past weekend at Nebraska. He was on his one of his visits at Nebraska, talking specifically Nebraska, and then we're going to get to Georgia. what kind of an impact would this be for Matt Rule in his first year to pull the top recruit, and how could this maybe impact the trajectory of a program that has frankly done a very weak job in recruiting over the past few coaching cycles?
It would be a tremendous uplift for the entire program for Matt Rule to land such a large great white shark, with his first recruiting cycle like this. And it would be extremely exciting, obviously, for the Nebraska fan base. And it really is. You can read some of the quotes from Dylan, just his feelings towards the Nebraska fan base, how his family feels about them, right? That environment that Nebraska brings is truly special. And I can relate to that too, because my brother tells a great story about how he went to Nebraska when he was at Texas, and they were walking down the tunnel. And when you're walking into the tunnel into the game, there's Nebraska fans on either side of you as you're walking in. And at first he goes, man, all right, here we go. We're about to get heckled here, because he's used to environments like Texas A&M and, the Red River Shootout with Oklahoma fans and all that. And he said that the Nebraska fans were shaking his hand and were like, come on, Sims, have a great game. Let's go. Give us a show, man. We can't wait to watch you guys play and compete. And he just couldn't get over the positive enthusiasm they had to just watch really good football and to compete at the highest level. There wasn't a hatred. There was an appreciation and a gratitude for just going out there and competing against each other. And he just thought that was a special thing.
I would argue, I don't know about you, but that would be more rattling for me than if somebody was saying something negative. I'd be like, what's wrong with them? Like, what am I missing here? Why are they being so nice to me?
No doubt. You're right. It's a total flip. It's very similar to, my father when he got sacked by Reggie White back in the day. And Reggie just saying, man, I'm sorry about this, but I'll see you in the next play. That's like more intimidating than, somebody talking smack for sure.
No, that's great. But for him to pull and end up at Nebraska, I'm actually kind of rooting for this. For him to end up at a program where he's got a family tied to, and instead to continuously feed the same programs with the top guys, I think that this could be the shakeup that we need in the Big Ten. I really do. That if he ends up at this program, I don't think that this is a circumstance where he shows up and doesn't live up to the expectations. He's going into a coaching staff that has, or playing for a coach that has a track record of building really competitive rosters. And I think that this is a piece that Matt Rule didn't have at Baylor, obviously never had a top overall recruit, that would put him over the top and make them a really, really highly competitive team, showing up and putting up fights against Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio State. That's exactly what they need.
It's exactly what they need, and it is an interesting place that Nebraska is in. And I think any of us who have been following the game for a really long time, and this is a perfect time where Ryan would be like, Joe, you're too young to remember this. But Nebraska is just one of those cultures that you do think about as far as winning and being a football community that is so invested in it. Like we think about other communities like that, like in Iowa, that has so been on the cusp for such the longest time, right? We obviously think of the Ohio States and Michigans of the world, but Nebraska, for the longest time was right there winning national championships and in the forefront of the game and what the game means to everyone, right? As being just a great role model for young football players and playing team football. And I think for Matt Rule to be able to accomplish that would be a tremendous feat for his resume that is already super impressive. And he's a guy that is a molder of men. And despite his failures at the NFL level, he was close to getting over the hump with the Carolina Panthers. Certain things, the quarterback position, all that obviously didn't help, but he is a good football coach. He has a proven track record, especially at the college level. And I like the fact that he's gotten guys like Satterfield and EJ Barthel, the offensive coordinator, running back coach, that were with him at Temple, that helped him build his career to what it is today. So he's putting a lot of good pieces together to improve this Nebraska Cornhuskers future.
Matt, I've got a little bit of a tinfoil hat theory with Georgia. So I don't know if I think that Georgia in the long term with the history of their quarterback position makes a lot of sense for Raiola. Like in theory, yes, them getting another
Okay.
5-star kid at any position is great for them. And I'm sure that Kirby Smart really wants to have another guy like that on their roster. But I look at the history of having Justin Fields on the roster, the physically more talented player, and them going with Jake Fromm, who was still highly recruited, but not as highly recruited as Justin Fields. Justin Fields leaves. And then there were other guys like JT Daniels that were on the roster, and they ended up going with Stetson Bennett. Part of me feels like, and it's kind of the Nick Saban circumstance of not every single year, but a lot of times he likes to lean on guys who very specifically fit the style of play that they like to play. And even with the talent on the roster, it seems like Kirby still leans on guys that maybe aren't highly recruited, aren't the most dynamic and explosive guys if they're inconsistent for whatever matter.
Right.
Maybe it's happening during practice. So, I mean, with that in mind, like, what do you think? Like, do you think that's enough for Raiola to consider it might not make the most sense for him to go and play out of Georgia with the track record that they've had at quarterback?
It's a really good point, Joe, and it is really interesting the thought of it when you really look back through their years now. And thank you for raising that thought, because I did not think about it to that extent. But you're right; they do not seem to they don't get held down by the stars that are brought in. Where I think with Nick Saban, that's actually kind of been the opposite. With him lately, when he gets a high level recruit, that guy's playing right away. For the most part, and Kirby does not seem to kind of hold himself to that standard or to be held down by that weight at all. So yeah, that's a really interesting take on that. I think for Dylan, and really for the quarterback position in general, it's really more so about just reps and playing. It really is. It really doesn't matter if you're winning national championships at the end of the day. We've seen so many, and I know that's like crazy to say, right? Because it's like you want to win, but at the same time, the development of the position it far exceeds, the titles that you receive, right, or that you win. And this is why you see so many guys every year who win the Heisman Trophy at the college level, but are just missing certain things that they need to be a great NFL quarterback. Right. Joe Burrow really recently is kind of one of the outliers, I think, of that, right? Is that he's the guy that doesn't have the physical, talent like a Dylan Raiola, right? He's still extremely talented. He fits more so of what we're talking about with Arch. He plays the position extremely well and makes great decisions. But, for Dylan, it's all about developing himself as a football player, right? More importantly than winning a national championship and just being a part of, the machine. Now, and I know that's a crazy take, but at the quarterback position, that really is the most important thing, especially if you have dreams of playing in the NFL. What place is going to be the best opportunity to improve each and every day at the position? What place is going to allow me to improve with multiple reps in games, in practices, to learn, to make mistakes, without the fear of being hooked off the field. And I think that's where like Nebraska has a huge advantage of that freedom to give him that ability to go out there and make those mistakes freely and to learn from them and then to improve from there.
It's going to be one of the more highly covered recruiting cycles for any prospect that we'll see. And maybe not as much as Arch, but still it is going to be one that we're going to be tracking very, very closely.
Right.
At Joe DeLeone, at Sims Complete QB. We're going to be back with more on this show. And also we'll be back next week with more college football recruiting, NFL draft analysis coming your way.